Welcome to Arirang Live. We're breaking into our regular programming to cover live the cabinet meeting starting in just a moment. President Yoon will preside over the meeting and report on the results and outcome of the recent summit with Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida last week. The president is expected to explain the progress on softening the bilateral ties with Tokyo. Now, that would include Seoul's plan to compensate its own citizens of Japan's wartime forced labor. Tuesday's cabinet meeting comes as part of the Yoon administration's efforts to tame any concerns and doubts over the Yoon-Kishida summit, namely what appears to be seen as less sincerity from the Japanese side. President Yoon is expected to explain the legitimacy of future-oriented cooperation between South Korea and Japan. Now, also to be included in the meeting is the government's latest proposal on reforming the current 52-hour work week system. The plan is to allow workers to do more overtime during busy hours and go on longer vacations. But the proposal has been met with a strong opposition with criticism, especially from the millennials and Gen Zers who believe the reform is rather inappropriate and inconsiderate of workers. Currently, the maximum number of hours of overtime a person can do per week is 12. But with the proposal, the 12-hour-a-week limit would be calculated on a monthly, quarterly, half-yearly, or yearly. Now, we are breaking into our regular programming to cover live the cabinet meeting starting in just a moment. Today, President Yoon will preside over the meeting and he'll report on the results and outcome of the recent summit with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida last week. President Yoon is expected to explain the progress on the mending the bilateral ties with Tokyo. That will include Seoul's plan to compensate its own citizens of Japan's wartime forced labor. Now, Tuesday's cabinet meeting, presided by President Yoon comes as the part of efforts of the Yoon administration to tame any concerns and doubts over the Yoon-Kishida summit that took place last week, namely what appears to be seen as less sincerity from the Japanese side. President Yoon is expected to explain the legitimacy of future-oriented cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo. Now, also to be included in the meeting is the government's latest proposal on reforming the current 52-hour work week system. The meeting has just kicked off, so let's take a listen.
If we open a quarrel between past and present, we shall find that we have lost the future. This is a quote from former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who led World War II to victory. We must face the past and remember it, but we shouldn't get caught up in the past. Korea and Japan relations have been in a deteriorating path. Dialogue between the two governments was stalled and bilateral relations have been neglected. The last Korea-Japan summit was held in December 2011. The Reconciliation and Healing Foundation, established with Japanese government contribution in 2016 under the Comfort Women Agreement in 2015, was also disbanded just after 2 years. The 2018 Supreme Court ruling on the forced labor case led to retaliatory measures of Japan, such as export ban and exclusion of Korea from whitelist. And Korea also filed a complaint against Japan to the WTO and excluded Japan from our whitelist as well. Historical conflicts spread into an economic conflict. In addition, after signing GSAMIA with Japan in 2016, we announced the end of GSAMIA in 2019 and again announced a postponement of this end 3 months later. So, as such, security cooperation between the two countries has been disrupted. Since I took office in May last year, I have been thinking about ways to normalize Korea-Japan relations that even its existence seemed uncertain. It felt like I was trapped in a maze without an exit, but I couldn't just sit and watch the situation. Intensifying strategic competition between the U.S. and China, the global supply chain crisis, the sophistication of North Korea's nuclear threat, complex crises surrounding us are intensifying. And that is why there's a need for cooperation between Korea and Japan. Korea and Japan are the closest neighbors of destiny with historical and cultural exchanges. Germany and France also sacrificed countless lives through 2 world wars, and after confronting these enemies, they reconciled after the war, and they are now the closest collaborating neighbors. Korea and Japan relations must now move on beyond the past. Even in a friendship, if something awkward happens, it doesn't mean that the relationship breaks. The misunderstandings are resolved and relationships are restored, and this is the same for Korea and Japan relations. Even if there are some differences of opinion, if we meet often and communicate, we can solve the problems and find ways to cooperate. Korea and Japan relations is not a zero-sum relationship with one gains more and the other loses. Korea-Japan relations is something that we have to work together, and it could be a win-win relationship, and it must be a win-win relationship. However, the previous administration left the bilateral relations in a quagmire. In the aftermath, the people of both countries and the ethnic Koreans in Japan suffered, and the security and economy of both countries have fallen into deep animosity. I, too, could choose an easy way for immediate political gain and become a president that neglects the worst bilateral relationship ever. However, I thought that if I tried to stimulate hostile nationalism and anti-Japanese sentiment and use it for political gains, then this would be abandoning my duty as a president. So, with my visit to Japan, my recent visit, the business worlds of Korea and Japan positively welcomed the visit, and expectations are high of the economic exchanges. And during my visit to Japan, I met with ethnic Koreans, and I heard from them their sacrifice, and they were very much looking forward to and anticipating of getting rid of these difficulties. The atmosphere is festive, and I am confident that this government is moving in the right direction. Overcoming the pain and unfortunate past between the two countries, we're establishing a new direction with Japan, and this is not the first effort. In 1965, former President Park Chung-hee and Japan had entered a new era of seeking common interests, common safety, and prosperity, and they promoted and pursued a normalization of diplomatic relations. At the time, the public opinion was also very hostile, and they fiercely opposed. However, President Park said this is not an inferior situation of Korea, but we should not fear of normalizing the relations with Japan, and it really is up to us how we look at this relations. And thanks to President Park's determination, companies such as Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and POSCO were able to grow into a world powerhouse. And with this, the Korean economy saw remarkable development and advancement. After that, in 1998, former President Kim Dae-jung opened up a new door to Korea-Japan relations. President Kim and former Prime Minister Oh Bu-chi declared a new Korea-Japan partnership of the 21st century. During his visit to Japan, President Kim Dae-jung said that the relationship between Korea and Japan and that was unfortunate was the 7 years of Japan's invasion of Korea and the 35 years of colonial rule. And he pointed out that it is indeed foolish to make this entire 1,500-year history of exchange and cooperation meaningless because of the unfortunate history of less than 50 years. In addition, President Kim Dae-jung said that it is time to turn the relationship into an indispensable and future-oriented relationship. And the declaration that they made was resolving the issue of recognition of the past history of the two countries, and it will become a cornerstone to carve out a common future of peace and prosperity. The 1965 Treaty on Basic Relations and the Korea-Japan Claim Settlement Agreement stipulate that the Korean government received Japanese subsidy on behalf of the people's individual claims. Under this, successive governments have worked hard to heal the pain of the victims of forced labor and provide reasonable compensation. In 1974, the government enacted a special law to provide 9.2 billion won, or 9.7% of the $300 million in claim funds received from Japan for more than 83,000 cases, and it was compensated financially. And the South Korean government has pushed for reimbursement by a third party based on the normalization of diplomatic relations in 1965 and the Supreme Court ruling in 2018. So this is where we are coming from. The government in the future will help the victims of the forced labor and their bereaved families to heal their wounds. In our society, we understand, and it is a clear fact that there are people seeking political gain that are urging for exclusive nationalism. And
따로 특정해서 통절한 반성과 마음으로부터의 사과 표명을 한 1998년
Japan had already expressed remorse and apology, and the representative case would be the 1998 Kim Dae-jung-Obuchi Declaration and the 2010 Kan Naoto's statement expressing deep remorse and heartfelt apology. And at this Korea-Japan summit, the Japanese government made it clear that it would inherit and uphold the stance of previous governments, including Kim Dae-jung-Obuchi Declaration. Chinese Prime Minister Zhu Enlai announced normalization of diplomatic relations with Japan in 1972, and in Beijing's joint statement, it was claimed that they are waiving the claim for war reparations. Remembrance of 1937 Nanjing massacre, they said it would not be forgotten, but the Prime Minister said the responsibility for the war lies with some militaristic forces, so we have to make a clear separation between the military aggression and between military aggression and normal people. Honorable Koreans, now we must face and treat Japan with dignity and confidence. Spreading out to the world, we are boasting our digital capabilities and cultural software, and by doing so, we have to cooperate and also compete in good faith with Japan. Now it is time for the governments of the two countries looking back on themselves and make efforts to remove the obstacles that hinder the normalization of the bilateral relations. And if Korea preemptively removes these obstacles, I am very sure that Japan will reciprocate. During my visit to Japan, I met with Prime Minister Kishida and the cabinet, as well as many key figures of the political and business realm. And all of them that I met, they said the improvement of bilateral relations will create a bigger synergy of cooperation in the fields as security, economy, and culture. And the opposition party also said that they would support actively the improvement of the relations. When I met with the students at the Keio University, I saw the students full of expectation for improved bilateral relations. Prime Minister Kishida and I, at the summit meeting, which was held after 12 years, we
한일 관계를 조속히
agreed that
회복시켜
the
나가기로
stalled
했습니다.
relations inflicted much pain to both Koreans and Japanese. And Korea and Japan share the universal values of freedom, human rights, and the rule of law. And we will pursue common interests in security, economy, and global agendas. And we are the closest neighbors and partners. And this is what we have affirmed with Prime Minister Kishida. In accordance with the national consensus to prepare for the future of the two countries, we will promote cooperation and we will further accelerate the discussion in various fields. To do this, cooperation between the two countries, including the strategic dialogue, the intergovernmental consultative bodies will be restored as soon as possible. And at the NSC level, Korea-Japan Economic Security Dialogue will also be launched. The President's Office of the Republic of Korea and the Office of Prime Minister of Japan will serve as a communication, and it will promote, both of us will promote common interests, strengthening cooperation on key issues such as core technology cooperation and supply chain. In addition, the Korea-Japan Future Partnership Fund will become a bridging role in revitalizing mutual exchanges. Japan lifted export restrictions on 3 items, semiconductor items, and Korea announced that it will withdraw its WTO complaint. And we will promptly restore the mutual whitelist status. I will preemptively
일본에 대한 화이트리스트 복원을 위해 필요한 법적 절차에 착수하도록
initiate necessary legal procedures to restore the whitelist status of Japan, and I will instruct this to the related minister. The improvement of Korea-Japan relations is primarily due to the linkage between Korean companies' outstanding technology and Japanese companies' competitiveness in materials and parts. And a stable supply chain will be established thanks to the cooperation. When supply chain cooperation materializes, the project that will be established in Yongin in the semiconductor cluster. Korea and Japan are the world's first and second largest LNG importers. The two countries, if we jointly respond to the weaponization of resources, this will greatly contribute to price stability. The cooperation of LNG sector deepens, and with this, the LNG ship orders from Japanese companies will increase, and joint R&D projects for future ships will expand, and this will lead to a joint address of carbon neutrality by 2050. In particular, strengthening economic cooperation between the two countries will open wide the opportunities for companies from both countries to come to the global market. Over the 24 years, from 1997 to 2021, there were 121 cases in 46 countries, estimated at 270 trillion won. Companies of both countries with world-class manufacturing capabilities, working together as partners, they will jointly advance into the global market with their best competitiveness. Japan is also the third largest economy in the world. Improving Korea-Japan relations will also contribute to expanding the Korean products and its export to Japanese market. And if cultural exchanges between the two countries become more active, this will also greatly help the recovery of domestic demand and revitalization of the local economy. The government will actively support cooperation between businesses and people-to-people exchanges so that the change is felt and tangible by the Korean people. We will promptly follow up ministerial meetings between between the two countries in the fields of industry, trade, science and technology, finance, and foreign exchange. And we will also speed up the establishment of dialogue between the two countries in the sectors of semiconductor and bio, and support joint research on quantum space and bio, and also jointly create joint funds for R&D and startups. Prime Minister Kishida and I agreed that to respond to ever-advancing North Korean nuclear and missile threats, the security cooperation between Korea and Japan and United States is very important. Last Thursday, 2.5 hours before I left for Japan, North Korea fired an ICBM. And I decided that North Korea's nuclear weapons and missiles, because of this, the Korea and Japan information sharing is necessary, and I declare that we would preemptively normalize GSOMIA without preconditions. So the uncertainty caused by the GSOMIA termination and its suspension in 2019, removing this uncertainty, we have laid the foundation for strengthening military intelligence cooperation among Korea, Japan, and United States. In addition, we agreed to stand in solidarity and closely cooperate in the process of promoting the humanitarian strategies of the two countries, which is Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy of freedom, peace and prosperity, and Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific. And we will work together to reactivate Korea, Japan, China trilateral summit to revitalize the regional dialogue. In the future, the two leaders of Korea and Japan will actively communicate and meet whenever necessary with shuttle diplomacy. The efforts to improve the bilateral relations should lead to concrete results, and to do so, every ministry should take follow-up measures following suit. We're now at a turning point in our history, and I believe in our wise Korean people. The normalization of Korea and Japan relations will ultimately inspire a new sense of pride in our people and will come back as a repay to our people and businesses with benefits. And above all, I am very certain that it will be a great hope and opportunity for future generations of our young people. Regarding government's working hour flexibility, we will take measures to ensure that workers don't feel nervous about the compensation system, especially such as wages and leaves, and especially in our society where the dual structure of the labor market is widespread. Guaranteeing workers' right to health and rest and preventing abuse of inclusive wage system, there should not be any doubts about these. And recently there were some controversies regarding maximum working hours per week, and I believe that working beyond 60 hours per week is unreasonable for your health protection. Indeed, I understand that there are opinions that this is a retreat from the flexible working hour. However, in realistic terms, it is difficult to protect the right to health of the laborers if there is no upper limit in the working hours. First of all, by freely setting the labor management agreement on working hours from weekly to monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, and annually, options for both sides of labor and management are broadened, and I believe this would help. The first task for labor reform is to establish the rule of law between labor and management. We must do away with illegality and violence.
노동개혁의 또 하나의 과제인 노동시장을
As
유연하는
for labor market
그 제도의 설계에 있어
flexibilization,
국민의 의견을 충분히 청취하고
we will
수집할
fully
것입니다.
solicit the opinions of the people in designing the system, and the respective and relevant ministries, such as Ministry of Employment and Labor, are instructed to conduct a detailed FGI survey and report the results to myself. In particular, the MZ workers and non-labor union workers, the workers of small and medium-sized enterprises, they will be communicated with actively. I hope to listen to good and wise opinions from our people. In creating a system that works for the people, we will not rush, but thoroughly deliberate and reflect the will of the people.
That was our live coverage of the cabinet meeting presided by President Yoon. He said it's a time to move on from the thorny relations with Tokyo now, especially when security and economic cooperation is more crucial than ever. And also regarding the government's recent proposal on reforming the 52-hour workweek system, he vowed to revitalize communications with a wide range of workers, including Gen Zers, millennials, and also SME workers. If you missed it, you can catch the highlights at our later newscast. Thanks for watching.
I'm live. 저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 없지. 텐션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고.
좋아요.